Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics. In this video, I'd like to discuss just how screwed we all are by reviewing what is being reported as the Prime Minister's master plan for dealing with the economic shock of the coronavirus pandemic. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news in politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So, yesterday, funny thing happened. Actually, a couple of funny things happened. One is that New Zealand got to declare itself coronavirus free. New Zealand being the country whose government did exactly the opposite of Boris Johnson's government. And so exactly the opposite that people have counterpointed everything they've said at every step of the way through this crisis. They are now clear of it. Obviously, they're still going to have to maintain border controls, which is just as easy for them to do as it is for an island like us. But they're free of it. We are the opposite of free of it. We are completely snookered. But another funny thing, imagine my surprise when yesterday the front page of the pro-Bojo the Wonder Clown Daily Express was the headline that Boris Johnson had a plan to save 3 million jobs and get our economy moving again. I mean, I suppose I should have smelled a rat when the same headline also had prominently the mention of the daily death toll dropping below 100 for the first time. Well, the first time since the peak, at any rate, as if we'd reached some great milestone. Now, I mean, that's not really the case. Even getting to it's encouraging. I mean, it's now 2 days in a row that we've had under 100 deaths recorded in a day. I just have to be a little bit careful when it's at the over the weekend because we don't record it. We don't have as many people working to record it, but it's still encouraging. It is encouraging. But it's still way higher than other comparable countries, so it's really nothing to be proud of, despite what Boris Johnson says, albeit encouraging. But still, not to worry, Boris Johnson may not be good at saving the lives of our loved ones, but at least he has a plan for the economy. I mean, that's what matters, right? And it does matter. I don't want you to be flippant about this. It actually does matter. Lives should matter as well. We could have had both, as New Zealand have showed us. But at least he has a plan for one of our problems. Nice one. Would you like to hear what it is? So would I. The thing is that there seems to be two parts to this plan. It seems to me that the Daily Express headline was boasting more than it could deliver upon, because there's the first part, which is the part that's Boris Johnson's input into the plan. And then there's the second part, which will be revealed in a few weeks. So the newspaper wasn't able to report on that. So the first part, the brilliant masterstroke that was worth splashing all across the front page in the estimation of this Tory rag, Boris Johnson, this is it, wait for it, it's absolutely brilliant this, Boris Johnson has told his ministers to come up with a plan. That was it. I did read the whole article. I had to read the whole article just to make sure I wasn't missing anything, and that's it. This is a newspaper that throughout everything keeps backing Boris Johnson and is pretty much the only section of the media that actually tries to report that Keir Starmer's the one who loses out in their clashes together in Parliament. And the best they can do to big up their man is to assure that everyone, Johnson is on it. He's got everything well in hand because he's got this great plan. Oh yes, what is the plan? He's told ministers to come up with something. Now, at the best of times, that's not a plan. That is not a plan. I mean, it's a Boris Johnson plan, sure, because that's what he does. He doesn't do detail, remember. He genuinely thinks leadership is telling a subordinate to come up with a way to solve a problem. And then he gets the credit because, well, I told them to come up with a solution, so really it's my solution, isn't it? That's how it works. And when they don't, well, that's not because the problem is insoluble or he didn't put in any ideas himself. No. It's because his subordinates are too negative. You don't believe hard enough. That's your problem. You need to believe more. He's like something out of a Disney film, isn't he? But these aren't the best of times. These are the times when we've had crisis after crisis after crisis. Someone said at the weekend that maybe people should, look back to the start of the year and their predictions for 2020 and how are they shaping up now. And as I was reading that, I was thinking to myself, did I come up with any prediction for 2020? I haven't dared look. I mean, how Brexit has unfolded is probably the only thing I would have talked about. Was not unexpected. In fact, I don't see anything proceeding at the moment on Brexit lines that is the slightest bit surprising. But everything else, I mean, we had floods in January. Obviously, you wouldn't predict that. When Boris, although you could predict that if we're going to have heavy rainfall, we're going to have floods. Because we really haven't prepared flood defences in this country. In fact, we keep making it worse. But, we had the floods, which Boris Johnson refused to even convene an emergency COBRA meeting for. He was too busy on holiday. Sorry, I'm on holiday. And then when he came back off holiday, he went on another holiday. Oh, sorry, I'm too busy. Holidays, they don't run themselves, Then coronavirus, big one, huge one. Too busy again. But he did eventually, reluctantly agree to COBRA meetings, which he then failed to attend for over a month. Then abandoning the tried and tested strategy for one conceived by a couple of eugenicists. Then the lockdown. Then we had the lockdown. Only after immense political pressure, he didn't want to put the lockdown in place at all. And now he's made sure that he can never do it again. Then the Dominic Cummings scandal. I mean, there were lots of mini scandals in between, but they were all pandemic related. So then we had Dominic Cummings and the almost complete evaporation of government authority. Then Black Lives Matter protests, which the government have singularly failed to get on the public's wavelength over. More credibility being lost again, no doubt. We'll see when the polls come out next week, I suppose. I mean, I guess it is possible they wouldn't lose any credibility over it because, after all, you could argue anyone who was still sticking to them after the Dominic Cummings saga, might well not really change their minds over this latest one. Some of these crises are self-inflicted, of course. Some are not. It's not the government's fault that we were hit by the pandemic. It is the government's fault that we didn't deal with it effectively. It's not the government's fault that Dominic Cummings is a massive bell end. But it is the government's fault that he is allowed to carry on being a massive bell end and not even apologise for it. It's not the government's fault that anti-racism protests broke out across the country in spite of social distancing rules. I believe this would have happened even if we had a government that hadn't lost the moral authority to tell people what to do. But it is the government's fault that they did not make a stand to show solidarity with the movement, which would have removed the need for much of the protest. Boris Johnson yesterday said that Britain is not a racist country. Okay then, so if Britain is not a racist country, what harm does he think he's doing his credibility by standing up and publicly taking a stand against racism? Why will he not publicly attack the racism in America as well as in Britain? Why will he not do that? He won't do that because in actual fact there is a lot of racism in Britain, and in actual fact an awful lot of that racism supports him. And it is the government's fault that we're not even on the starting blocks for arranging a deal with the EU after breaking promises. Everything about Brexit is the government's fault, of course, because it's all self-inflicted. But they made promises and then they're breaking those promises. And it is also the government's fault that we are not going to extend the transition period to allow us to focus on one epoch-ending crisis at a time. And that is the thing. Even if the Prime Minister was just a buffoon, an otherwise decent government might well be able to come up with sensible measures to make the best of our economy in the face of the pandemic. But we don't have an otherwise decent government. Boris Johnson has not put anyone around him that he would like to see as a threat. We have cabinet ministers who are appointed on the basis of being politically and economically insane. Airhead and bubble brains that's what he's filled his government up with. That is what we have. There is not a snowball's chance in hell that he will be able to get these muppets to come up with anything remotely credible as a plan. But there's going to be an announcement in a few weeks' time. What's it going to be? I do have a notion. So we already know that the government want to get pubs and restaurants back open again. There's a lot of industries hamstrung by the lockdown, of course, but the hospitality industry, along with travel and tourism, have been by far, understandably, the most devastated. And they account for a lot of jobs. But let's face facts, we are not New Zealand. There is zero prospect of this government ever managing the virus out of the country without a pharmaceutical solution, without a vaccine or a cure, and we don't know that either will come around, and if they do, we don't know when. Without those things, this government has no chance of getting this virus under control. Which means the prospect of actually safely being able to open pubs and restaurants again is nil. So that means those industries are screwed. Except the government are determined that that should not be the case. So if I have to predict what they will announce, Mugs game predictions, but if I had to predict what they will announce, it will likely be not so much a plan for safely reopening hazardous sections of our economy, but revised guidelines masquerading as a plan to make the hazardous seem safe. And we've seen it before. They've got form on this. When we were running out of PPE, the government just changed the guidance on PPE use to essentially say you don't need it. I know the guidance says you need it. I've changed the guidance, says you don't, so we're fine, yeah? You do need the PPE, yeah, but can you just reuse it? But this is disposable, it's one use only. No, could you reuse it? I'm changing the guidelines so you can reuse it. That's how they dealt with that. When it became clear that easing the lockdown would make social distancing impossible at 2 metres, what they're doing, they talk about, well, 1 metre is probably fine. Because that's how they do it. They don't actually come up with a plan to make the situation safe. They change the guidance on what is safe. I hate doing air quotes. Don't let me do that again. And that's it. And so this is the thinking that will, I'm fairly sure, be evident again during this grand announcement of Boris Johnson's master plan, which, remember, has to be come up by the likes of Dominic Raab and Priti Patel and Michael Gove and Jacob Rees-Mogg and yeah. Round about the end of this month, you would think. They haven't given a definite date when this announcement's going to be. Round about the end of the month. With a bit of Brexit tub thumping thrown in for good measure, I shouldn't wonder. So there it is. Are you as relieved as I am that he has a plan? Good. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. If you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.